Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. I am Sonali, and today, we want to give a warm welcome to our panel on the Fireside Chat. We have Bay as our moderator, we have Lim and Abhishek joining in us as our panelists for the Fireside Chat. Today, we'll be talking about the role of youth on the Southeast Asia's energy transition. And this panel is going to play a crucial role explaining and talking about the work that they have been doing. I'll briefly introduce our moderator who will take forward this conversation. So Bay is External Affairs Director for Y4E-SEA. She holds a master's degree in Asian Studies from University of Philippines. She has over 3 years of professional experience working at the forefront of Philippines energy regulatory sector. Outside of work, she has demonstrated a solid commitment to education, inspiring undergraduate students through her roles as an educator for diplomacy and international affairs major. Welcome, Bay. I will hand the floor over to you for taking this conversation forward.
Thank you so much, Sonali. Okay, I hope everyone is ready. So before we begin, let me just give you a quick introduction of what this session is all about, okay? So I hope you're all ready to dive into one of the most electrifying conversations of our time. Welcome to the session that's all about you and that's all about youth and your incredible potential to transform the future of Southeast Asia's energy landscape. Today, we will be embarking on an opportunity to engage with our esteemed speakers in a discussion of immense significance, one that concerns profoundly the future of Southeast Asia and the pivotal role that our youth will be playing in shaping its energy landscape. The contribution of the younger generation is undeniably central. The voices of our youth resonate as beacons of hope and progress in these transformative times. As we explore this topic, this virtual session aims to invite you to a fireside chat on the role of youth in Southeast Asia's energy transition. I am Buensuceso from the Philippines, and I'm currently the External Affairs Director of Youth for Energy Southeast Asia. And Y4E is actually the one who's hosting this event for today, and allow me to introduce to you what our organization is all about. Okay, so what does our logo mean? So our logo shows an infinite loop with two arrows representing both circular economy and sustainability. It also shows a tree symbol representing the natural world and having the lightning rod representing electrification and energy. The sun, on the other hand, represents renewable energy. As for us, Youth for Energy Southeast Asia, we are very much advocating SDG 7 or affordable and clean energy of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. What is our vision? Youth for Energy Southeast Asia stands on the vision of a network of youths with strong voices from countries in Southeast Asia, supported in the effort to collaborate, learn, and work towards the energy transition. Our mission are as follows. We have three. So the first one is to increase representation of Southeast Asia's energy transition at the regional and international level. Number two is to support youths in building careers in clean energy and energy transition related fields to advancing regional energy agenda. And number three, to collaborate and amplify actions and projects with similar organizations around the world. So how was Y4E founded? Y4E was founded initially on October 2022 when our co-founders, Jitsai and Amira, met at the Youth Economic Forum hosted by PFAA in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So both of them expressed their passion to drive the energy transition in Southeast Asia, and they agreed that there was a lack of representation on the international stage. As a result, on March 2023, they officially launched Youth for Energy Southeast Asia at the ASEAN Youth Economic Forum, hosted by ASEAN Youth Organization in Jakarta, Indonesia. Gratitude for AYO for providing us with the space to launch our youth-led network in person among fellow ASEAN youth delegates. So in this regard, I will be your moderator for today and will not take long, but I will be introducing to you our first speaker. Our first speaker with great anticipation is one of my colleagues at the Youth for Energy Southeast Asia. And he will be giving us his insights about understanding the current landscape of Southeast Asia's energy mix. Dr. Lim Jen Wen, or Endry, boasts a decade of diverse experience in driving national transformation, financial services, energy, and technology across Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa. His work in policy advancement and transformation for both public and private sectors reflect his keen insights into complex industries. An accomplished strategist, Endry led the creation of multi-year strategies for corporations like PayNet and Green Packet Berhad. With a strong educational background in economics and engineering, Endry blends analytical prowess with strategic thinking to catalyze business growth and tackle complex challenges head on. He is a sustainability advocate, change management specialist, and a sought after expert in his field. Everyone, allow me to please introduce to you my fellow colleague, Dr. Endry Lim, who is also Youth for Energy Southeast Asia's Research Director. Dr. Lim, you may now have the floor.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just give a brief overview of what is happening in ASEAN itself. Hi, Abhi. Right. So I don't have slides to present. So just hoping that this would be an interactive session as well. Abhi, just jump in anytime that you want. So I think I'm just gonna give a brief overview of the ASEAN energy outlook itself, right? If you look at ASEAN itself, it's actually a block of sort of like Europe or the North America, right? ASEAN is a block of quite a big block, right? Where you see a lot of population growing and you see energy demand, right, coming up. So what we look at from today to 2050, we expect the ASEAN energy demand is going to grow by threefold, right? And why this is important to highlight, because youths are the future, right? We will be living in that future when energy demand grows, when energy supply required needs to grow as well. And that's where we see that energy transition or clean energy transition is key for us to actually move towards that direction, right? So I think that sets the context of why youth perspective is important and youth participation in actually crafting and developing the policies moving forward in this region itself is key, right? ASEAN is slightly different compared to the other regions, right? You have more homogeneous kind of growth, infrastructure and demographic in other regions. But in ASEAN itself, you will see a very diverse culture, very diverse infrastructure, very huge variability and gap between different countries in terms of readiness of infrastructure, in terms of readiness of policy, but in general maturity towards energy transition is still fresh in this region, right? I think that lays the context for why we are having this fireside chat today.
Okay. Allow me to also introduce to you one of our speakers. Abhishek is an advocate at bar practicing in Delhi, India. Being a young lawyer and a driven youth development. Oh, sorry, I'm not on in my camp. Okay, there we go. Continuing. Being a young lawyer and a driven youth development advocate, he is well versed with nuances of legislation, policy action, and is sensitive to the societal needs. Abhishek is also a judicial aspirant and is currently preparing for judicial services exams in India. He is also the co-founder of Y4E-SEA, an international research center which studies and demystifies human rights like gender, health care, and data protection, environment and economy from the lens of youth. He is also serving as the director of research at the ASEAN Youth Organization. Through Y4E-SEA, Abhishek has mentored over 60 researchers, has led and advised various research projects. Abhishek is passionate about legal literacy, inclusivity, responsible governance, and accountable and reliable news/media reporting. His mission with Y4E-SEA is first to provide youth access to interesting, educational, and contemporary quality material to provoke their thoughts so they can formulate, learn opinions, and become productive members of the society. To provide the stakeholders a gateway into what the youth wants or expects from them, and ultimately help bridge the gap between what the stakeholders do and what needs to be done for the betterment of youth. Everyone, let us also welcome our fellow speaker, Abby from Y4E-SEA. Abby, I hope you can say a few regards. Yes, you're
Namaste,
audible.
everybody. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are from the world. It's a pleasure to be here and, to see such amazing people from all across the world being here. Endry and Bia, both of them are from Y4E, and we are actually working on a research collaboration together. That is, why I've been invited here. But before I dive in, please allow me to maybe share a little about AYO Recent, and then maybe I'll come down to the discussion. There are some projects which we did at an ASEAN level, some projects which were done, incorporating the analysis from 2 or 3 countries. Essentially, we focus on human rights, environment, and economy. That's where most of our research, intersects and lies. And currently, we're actually working on a very good project with Y4E, which is going to focus on clean energy in SDG 7, which we will discuss shortly. Just to add on to what Endry was saying before I pass the floor back to him, I think we are so fortunate today that we have these platforms where we can have the fire chats and the webinars and the sessions and be integrated with each other. I think one of the best things that came out of the pandemic was the ability of people to share knowledge virtually. Everybody was in a state of shock and they had to, reasonably adapt. And I think that is when we actually had the time to explore so many different things. You could be staying in India, but you could be assisted in an organization which is working in Indonesia, and vice versa. And I think that in its own way has made the youth much more sensitive and also much more, I would say, proactive. Today we are demanding the right things need to be done, and nobody can ignore the fact that youth today are the drivers of change. And essentially, I think that is why it's very important to understand and study the perspective of the youth in whatever policy we are making, because law is essentially what but the collective consciousness of the society, right? Whatever the society deems appropriate, wrong, or that needs to change, that is where the will of the law also needs to bend. With these thoughts, I will pass the floor back to Endry. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I think that's a good
Endry, you are on
prelude
mute.
into what some of this research that we are talking about, right? I think one of the key emerging themes in the region or globally is something called energy justice, right? How do you then balance in terms of energy economics, energy security, as well as environment per se, right? Once you have energy justice, that's where energy policy and laws actually govern, right? And balancing the dynamics of the three things. So just give everyone here, I think some of the participants here who are wondering what we are doing, right? So one of the key research that we are planning to conduct on the ASEAN youth itself is essentially on assessing youth perception towards the clean energy transition, readiness for clean energy transition. Now, there has been a lot of different research as well as studies going on in the region, in the global scene. But why ASEAN is such an important piece? Because I think ASEAN is a region with, like what I mentioned just now, diverse culture, right? ASEAN is a region with varying or vast varying infrastructure, right? We are made up of a lot of different islands. We are not directly connected to some of the different countries. However, under ASEAN itself, you will see that we are aspiring to have ASEAN power grid and things along those lines. So now, why do we want to then assess youth perception, right? Because youth make up at least 60% of the population moving forward in the future itself, right? So this study itself, some of the key questions we're going to ask, right? Now, to what extent youth in ASEAN right now is engaged individually right? Onto clean energy transition, renewable energy, energy efficiency, right? Those are the key items that we want to gauge and see where youths are right now in terms of understanding. Now, the second part is also to understand what youth perception or awareness on what the government is doing, right? Or what their universities are doing, what our corporates in the different regions are doing. I think those are key things that we want to gauge. Why? Because from there, then we can draw our hypothesis on some of the key areas that we want to understand further, right? So what are the key hypotheses that we have right now, right? Is there a gap between energy transition readiness, right, among youths in different countries in the region itself, right? Can we overlay that with different policies, readiness, maturity of existing policies itself, or simply just what are the knowledge gap between the different um, countries, right? So those are one of the key things I want to gauge. Number two, it's also to see whether there's a correlation between active engagement of youth in assessing energy transition readiness, right? How do we have a more inclusive and participatory approach for policy making, right? So some of the key reasons why youth feels that that youth feel nowadays, especially in policy making, is their voice are not heard, right? And hence we have a lot of different platform nowadays, and that's why we have Youth for Energies. We have AYO, right, pushing for some of the youth agenda, right, to make sure that our voice are heard. So essentially, to sum it all, this is one of the research that we want to and also one of the flagship publication that we are working with AYO recent to actually gauge youth readiness, especially in the ASEAN region, where the nuances of the ASEAN region is also taken into account, right? Especially looking at how diverse we are, and the composition of youth moving forward is going to be huge in this region itself. Right? Back to you, Bea.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Endry. That was actually a really good introduction of what youths are like capable of, like in terms of their potential and how ASEAN is seeing the role of youths in terms of sustainable energy transition. I think that provided a good way to open up our panel discussion this afternoon. So maybe for both Endry and Abby, maybe you can start first by giving out your insights on how do you see the youth's role in advocating for clean energy resources? Maybe we can start with Abby.
I hope everybody can hear me. Please let me know, Bea.
Yeah.
All right. So I
Yes, we
think,
can hear you, Abby.
now let's move to the another segment of this discussion. Essentially, what I want to bring in here, like I am by means, I'm not gonna say that clean energy is definitely something that I am in on the forefronts or in the trenches of, or is my forte, but I believe that an understanding of law essentially brings home the point which I want to share with everybody here. I think we see a lot of discussion today surrounding like a transition to cleaner energy, and there is a push for EVs today. Everybody's, I mean, even the governments are incentivizing the usage of electrical vehicles. However, while in one part of the world we are having the electrical vehicles, in the other part of the world, Africa, there are people who are engaged in slave labor where they have to mine the cobalt for our EVs, right? So when we are talking about a transition to cleaner energy, what I want to challenge you to think about is how do we make this transition equitable and accessible? Because even in one country in itself, there are so many disparities in the particularly based on income. I think as of 2020, it is believed that around 40 million people in Southeast Asia still lack access to electricity. Right. This is based on a research that was done by International Energy Agency. Right. Similarly, I think there are still around 700 million people in the world who do not have access to basic electricity. So, like on one side of the spectrum, we have people who definitely do not have the, like even the basic necessities of what we have. And on the other side, we are looking at a transition. You can say it's like the other side of the moon, which is looking more bright and is trying to move towards a cleaner future. That being said, I think it is very essential as youth that we take the onus of advocating for a transition to cleaner energies, because we're all aware about climate change. We're all aware about how it is leading to resource depletion, etc., etc. And also there are so many intersectionalities. For example, there was a study that was done, I think, in Madagascar, where due to climate change, how the environment and even the soil of Madagascar was transforming. It was actually the women who were being driven away from the land itself. They were either being sold, they were human trafficked, or they were forced to leave their houses or homes because men wanted to take over the resources as limited as they were. So every action has intersectionalities, and I think whenever we advocate for something, I want to challenge you to think that you look at things from a more objective or a multifaceted perspective, right? So I think this is one of the messages I want to pass on to the youth in terms of the activism or anything that we are passionate about. Essentially, youth are the key stakeholders in the energy transition, because while the politicians or even generations above us, they shrug us off and say that we do not know as much, we probably do not have much value, or we do not add much value to the society. Perhaps it may be true from a very regressive point of view uh, right now, but tomorrow we would be living in this world, and it is absolutely all right for us to fight for our future, right? That is what SDG is about. SDG is nothing but like a big optimistic plan in my eyes, that we are trying to leave this world better than we found it, and we are trying to ensure that the resources that we are using today are essentially enough to sustain the lives even you know after us. So I think these are just some points I wanted to highlight here, and I think I'll now pass the mic back to Endry, and I'll let him chime in, and then we'll have a discussion
Yeah.
going forward.
Okay, Abhi, I think that's a very good point. So going back to one of my key research I think that I've done, I think this is something called energy trilemma, right? It fits nicely. So what is trilemma? Economic, energy economic, which you look at accessibility, affordability, and viability of that, right? You want people to have access, you want people to be able to afford energy, but you don't give subsidy on a blanket basis. You want to make sure that it's sustainable moving forward, right? I think that's a good point for everyone to start thinking about it, right? Sometimes youth, when we push for things, um, we are idealistic, right? However, we also need to take into account some of the um, existing interconnectedness as well as legacies that we need to untangle as we move forward, right? So I think that's where youth come in, bringing in creativity, bringing in their voice, bringing in a new sense of energy on how we do things, right? There are also, on the second tenet, you will talk about energy security, right? We want to have access to energy. We want cheap energy access, but we also need to take into account everyone is in it for themselves, right? So how do we make sure that energy security in our region itself is also covered, right? I think that's essentially to ensure that everyone would have equitable access, every country would have equitable access to energy as well, right? So that's where you look at how different blocks of continents in the world negotiate and as well as play around in terms of energy, right? And lastly, you look at environment, right? People always think about going green, energy efficient. You need a lot of investments, and you need a lot of different skills. You need a lot of additional cost to business or cost to doing business, right? Now that's where use comes in, right? You bring in new ideas, you bring in knowledge and gap skills that maybe some of the older generation don't even have, right? How do you have dynamic electricity tariff moving forward? How do you use generative AI to actually manage your dispatch of electricity? So some of those key things is where youth play a big role. I mean, in Malaysia and India, right? I think the key thing here is we are in a democratic country, right? If we want our agenda on clean energy transition and climate change being heard, we need to make sure that it is loud enough. It is something that we fight for, and that's where the policymakers would then hear, right? Because it's a very realistic environment that we are in, right? And if we believe that we should not deprive our future generation a place where it's worse off than where we started when we were born in, then that's where we need to make sure our voice are heard, right? And not only heard, but in a constructive manner. I think that's where I think in this conversation we are giving some of the key points on how youth can actually value add to policy decision making. How can we value add in terms of amplifying our voice collectively, right? Yep.
Okay. Okay, so that's very interesting. Both Abby and Endry highlighted how very important the youths are in terms of Southeast Asia's energy transition. Maybe for the next question that I can ask, do you think there are specific challenges that these youths have faced in terms of specifically advocating their own advocacies in energy transition? And how does this compare with other places in the world as outside of Southeast Asia? Maybe Abby, you can start.
So I think one of the biggest thing is that at at some points we're very creative, we're very thinking out of the box, but at the same time, on other side of things, when we are living our life daily and it becomes very monotonous, we forget that every action that we're doing has sustainable consequences. For example, I think very often, if I just take up the example, in Cambodia, in Myanmar, it is believed that biomass fuels are like very popular even for cooking, and even up till recently, I think there are new researchers which have come up that using a gas cylinder is not the most like healthy way of making your food. And in India, whenever our moms are making the chapati sometimes, or even uh, I think Sonali would know what I'm talking about. Sometimes they just cook the roti directly on the stove, right, to make sure that it's cooked nicely and quicker. Now, all these things are also having repercussions in the sense that some people believe cooking directly over the stove can cause cancer. Similarly, even using biomass fuels or not cleaner or more efficient way of cooking, or for example, not using an induction stove, they are causing a lot of health related problems. So sometimes we are not realizing how little things in our life also have consequences. But I think it definitely has to do with the fact that very often our thoughts are being restricted by the surroundings that we are in, right? So it's just one example. I'm trying to make you understand that a simple act of you maybe throwing something even properly is where it can make a big difference. It might prompt you to think, why should I care? There are so many other people who are throwing the trash here and there anyway. I should not bother. But the very act of making sure you're putting your trash in the right place, maybe a lot of people also have that sense of understanding, and that would help us move towards more sustainability and also you know cleaner outputs. I think what I'm talking about generally feels really, really, I would say, basic. But we did a research recently for AYAF in Jan, and it was released in March of 2023, and the survey was actually targeted towards realizing if young people are aware about the sustainable outcomes, of the daily things that they do. And many often people are not as aware, or even if they are aware, you know there are things like laziness. For example, the research talked about recycling e-waste, and one of the key things we wanted to understand was how is the youth reacting to recycling e-waste. Are they even aware about it? So I think one of the basic problem that came up was that e-waste needs to be recycled in a particular way. If your phone is not working anymore, if your laptop is not working anymore, it doesn't make sense for you to keep on storing it. You have to go to a recycling center and give it, but the recycling centers are not as present, so people are not able to go and recycle even if they want to. So I think there are so many barriers, systemic, which we often do not think about. I mean, sorry for using the term barriers and systemic together. I know it might sound heavy, but I want you to understand is that our ability to think extends to bigger things. I feel like we are very hypermetropic, if or what's the opposite of myopic. We are only focused on, let's say, the far reaching things, but even trying to change these little things in our life can go a long way. That is what I wanted to maybe highlight here. Endry, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I think Abhi, you brought up a good point, right? So there are number one, right? Starts from individual. One, whether the before we even go into the challenges that the youth have, right? Number one is where we have the willingness of the youth itself to take that action independently, right? And that willingness itself depends on two things. One, whether it costs them a lot of effort or money. Number two, it's whether they are aware of it or not, right? So that's one area or bucket that we look at. Now, if we go into the next part, right, in terms of if the youths are aware of um, 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 climate change, clean energy transition, and things like that, then now the awareness part kicks in. You have awareness, but the problem now is then what Abhi mentioned: infrastructure. Do we have the right infrastructure currently to support some of those initiatives? Number two, infrastructure is always the hardware, right? We see that as a hardware. Now, if you look at the software part of things, there are youth that feels that they lack uh, green skills, right? And you look at a lot of studies, they say that if youth nowadays, there is a lot of skill gaps, right? So that with that skill gap, they are not able to be involved in a workforce that is related to green energy, right? And some projected that 60% of young people may lack those necessary skills, right, to excel in 2030. Now, although it's done by a renowned agency, right? But I would want to challenge that, right? Because lacking of skills may come in two forms, right? One is where the youth itself are not willing to upskill themselves, right? Or the institutions itself are not equipped to actually update their curriculum to talk about some of those things. But number two itself, it's actually going back to the willingness, right? If you know that that is something or an area that it would improve on, you have so many different certifications, online, even online degrees and certifications that you can get on green skills, right? So there are a lot of avenue that is available, and I challenge the youth out there to actually find a way. When there's a will, there's a way, right? It's also something that we want to control itself, right? We want to have control of what we want to do moving forward, and that's where we want to have that software with us, right? I think that's the second part. Number three is where youths always feel that maybe want to challenge people don't take us seriously, right? Whatever voice, whatever policies that we speak up, people feel that it's a challenge because we are not heard, right? Now, then collectively, I think that's where all these different platforms comes, and we need to have a collective voice of um, structurally and concisely telling the government what are the policies that we recommend, what are the benchmark that we see in other countries, and we do not have to reinvent the wheel, right? We can just refine and use are doing things in a more agile manner moving forward, right? We do sprints, it's iterative. We just need to make sure that um, we structure our clean energy transition policies moving forward to be agile enough to adapt to changes. I think those are key things, right? So just to recap, number one, hardware, software, as well as the enabling policies, right? To enable use. And that's where we need to play a role in, right? If we see that there are challenges and stuff, that's where we have collective effort to push some of those things forward, right? Back to you, Bea.
Okay, thank you so much, Endry and Abby. That was very interesting to hear that there are specific different challenges about youth's participation. And it's interesting to see also that how, despite of these challenges, youths are still an important catalyst for the change and sustainable energy transition. Since you have mentioned challenges, maybe let us look into the different opportunities on how organizations, companies, can be there to provide opportunities for young people. So, my question is, what can organizations, companies, and energy stakeholders can provide in terms of concrete solutions for helping out youths who want to engage in sustainable energy transition? Maybe Abby, you can continue.
Top of my head would be, I think corporations need to realize that they are not free from the they're not absolved of the, you can say, the responsibility, especially the MNCs, because I think there is a trend which, I mean, you can call it conspiracy theory. It is believed that the MNCs from the developed countries are trying to, when they talk about, let's say, net zero, what they want is net zero for us, but we will still go and manufacture in other countries to get the resources that we want. So I think, I mean, I'm not trying to help you read into it, but I'm just trying to help you understand also that there is, we cannot deny that there are some organizations, MNCs in the world, which do have a lot of power, be it not only political, but I mean, economic, and hence also can be political in some ways. But I think, if speaking to everybody here, I would like to say that, we should try to push not only our governments to incentivize things like community engagement, job creation, and inclusive financings through these MNCs, or any businesses per se, any structured businesses who have the capacity should be contributing. I think inclusive financing can also be looked into as green financing, and also I think in India particularly, or I think true for other Southeast Asian countries too, there is a need for investment in R&D. There is a lot of need for investment in R&D. Even if we talk about the Mangalyaan that recently, sorry, the Chandrayaan, that Chandrayaan 3, which recently has successfully started taking pictures at the orbit of the moon. Our budget is much less than what NASA provides for space exploration. So I think these things, essentially, innovation, technology, and providing fresher, newer alternatives and avenues, I think initially they require a lot of investment, but there are better returns. And I think governments around the world need to make sure, especially in Asia, that they're not you know discounting uh, how their support can go a long way. And I think, essentially, again, coming down to creating more opportunities for active engagement, providing opportunities for the youth to work in the regulatory framework, and data sharing is, again, you can relate that to R&D, but I think it is very important for the corporations to be sharing best practices with government. I think that is something that we can probably try and achieve. So these are just like few
Just
points from
to
my
add
side.
on to what Abhi mentioned, I think for corporation itself, I think maybe I'll simplify into three key things, right? Number one, now, if you want youth to have participation, I think number one, you really need to then start identifying what are the key areas, opportunities for youth to actually participate in, right? You need to specify some of those things and be clear, right? I mean, that's number one. Number two, it is always important. If you look at distributive justice as well as procedural justice in the law and policy, right? You want to increase transparency of how youth input is integrated into policies in the company or across the country, right? So that is an important point. And number three, It's how do you put words into action? How do you then mobilize resources to help some of the youth-led initiative? I think those three key things are important, right? And then number four, from a private sector perspective, it makes good ROI or investment sense for you to actually invest into youth going into clean energy. If that is something where you identify as a key risk moving forward, or climate risk is one of the key things that you identify for your organization, you need the future generation to actually be in there and find a new dynamic into those areas. I think those are key areas that we should be aware, as well as providing that platform for youth, right? It's not about yeah, we support youth, right? But what do you support youth specifically, right? What kind of actions do you put in to actually support youth? And um, I think those are my key points. I saw a question by Manasif, right? So maybe we can answer that question. I don't know. Yeah. So Mana was asking, there is always a rural and urban gap, right? In terms of access to energy and opportunities for engagement. I think I won't be, maybe Abi, you can step in and talk about the case in India itself. From the case of Malaysia, I think that's how we actually do and look into rural and urban areas, especially access to energy. What we did was to actually have what we call labs previously during the economic transformation program. Now, what we did was actually to identify what are the villages that we have across Malaysia itself, and then determine whether should we put microgrids or have national grid, right? That is one, to ensure that we have access, to make sure that those village have access to energy. Number two, consideration of microgrids, consideration of national grid. Then we take into account what are the potential options. One would be solar, right? Renewable energies. That's where we can have microgrid into those areas. Number two, how do we make sure that we engage them, right? So we have a Ministry of Rural Development, and that's where we make sure that when we do energy planning, when we do our uh, planning in terms of because we have our commitment to have 100% accessibility to electricity. Now, what we engage when we make policies, we do engage with those ministries, which goes down to the agencies that looks after the natives, right? And that's where we make sure that they have a voice on the table and provide us with information that we need to actually effectively um, two things, right? Tackle the nuances of going into the village and actually installing those things, because not every village would want electricity and or people to discover them, right? The more you develop that area, the more they move into a remote area. So there are different engagement as well as communication that are required. I think that's the case of Malaysia, right? Yep. Abi, you want to add?
Thank you so much for your question, Manasvi. If I may give like a very simplified answer to it, I think essentially what I want to highlight is that in my experience as a let's say a delegate or even at a speaker or a presenter at different conferences, I've seen very often, especially from the Asian countries or Asian delegates, that we mostly try to you know jump at a pace of where the West is trying to go and what they are trying to achieve. So what I'm trying to say is that essentially most of the discussions at such seminars would be about transition to EV, how that might benefit the climate, etc., etc. And on the flip side of things, people would be talking about how like such a big transition too soon, too suddenly is going to be very cost intensive. So like both the sides are only looking at serving, I think, the one creamy layer of people who can probably afford EV, or it may become a status symbol where people may try to achieve that. Very often the discussion remains on surface level. What I want to maybe help you understand, or maybe let this be the key takeaway from this session. Whenever you go at these conferences, seminars, or wherever, I think you need to realize you are representing everybody that live within your country. You're not only representing the people who can afford, you know, to transition to cleaner fuels, even if they are expensive. But at the same time, there are people who do not have access to even basic things like clean cooking fuel, right? So I think the progress in both direction is very different. The progress that needs to be applied to one segment cannot necessarily be applied to the other one. So there should not be only a robust push for one, but there needs to be a collective consideration of both sides, wherein, let's say there is, just think about it, if even if you're talking about financing, when the government is financing the urban sector, it would need to be financed in a much different way and to a different degree as compared to what may be required in the rural areas. The sad reality is that there are some rural areas where even the basics are not met at a very consistent rate, right? So first you need to, I think, uplift that, but that is not to say that you feed into their bad habits. You try to make the transition much more smoother for them by essentially, trying to uplift their standard of living, etc. I think there are some schemes that are existing going on, that, we've got the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Urja Suraksha, I think something like that is called PM Kusum, and they are trying to promote, installation of solar powered agricultural pumps and grids in the farms. And then you've got your Sobhagya Rojna. Sobhagya Rojna, I think, is focusing on providing free electricity connections to households and uplifting their, deficiency of energy. And I think there is also a program where they're trying to install biogas plants to make sure that there is a cleaner fuel for cooking, etc. So I think there are, a lot of schemes and progresses being made in the rural area, which I think is definitely commendable based on, I mean, how effectively they are being, you can say, implemented. But it's good to see that, there is a shift in thinking about